Welcome back. The Government Accountability Office calls strategic human capital management one of the government's toughest management problems. It's on the GAO's high-risk list, and it's a common thread throughout many of the other challenges on the high-risk list, too. Candice Wright, Acting Director for Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics at GAO. She testified to the House Science Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations about strengthening the science and technology workforce. Candice, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. What was the main message that you wanted to convey to the committee in your testimony?
Well, we thought it was important to emphasize that the federal workforce is really key to making government function better, to cost effectively serve the public, and achieve results across the spectrum of policy issues. Science and technology is central to many agencies' missions, and so the hearing provided an opportunity to highlight some of the longstanding issues that we've seen in our work regarding human capital management, particularly for those agencies with science and technology missions. As you mentioned, GAO has identified strategic human capital management as a high-risk area for 20 years, and we have an extensive body of work in this area. And in fact, for the testimony, we drew on 20 reports over the past 5 years that have highlighted various science and technology workforce issues. What we've seen in our prior work and what we wanted to convey is that agencies often struggle with attracting and retaining a workforce that meets their needs, not just the needs of today, but more importantly, the needs for future missions. And so we really wanted to highlight 3 key areas: workforce planning, also taking a look at pay and hiring authorities, and then the last piece looking at the federal work environment, which is important for people deciding to either seek federal employment or continue to be part of the federal workforce.
I want to look at each of those 3 key areas that you testified about, Candice, and ask you to tell me more about what you have found. What's common maybe in each of those areas among those 20-some pieces of work that you referenced? Strategic workforce planning is first, and this is something that's top of mind because of this NAPA report on OPM and the fact that that group recommends that OPM should move from a more tactical to a more strategic approach. Where's the government really lacking in strategic human capital planning right now?
Well, one of the really key things is workforce planning, really taking a look at understanding, what is the agency's mission and defining what are the skills that are needed in order to execute on the agency's mission. And we really think workforce planning is a critical first step to ensuring that agencies are best positioned to execute their mission. We've certainly seen in a number of the reports that we've done where that process for having workforce planning is really lacking. And so it makes it really difficult for the agencies to really have a strategy in place to determine, what skills they're going to need, but more importantly, how they will go about developing a strategy to obtain those skills.
One of the things that jumped out at me in this testimony is that a substantial number of agencies know what they need to do because you've made recommendations to them, haven't done it. 18 of 24 agencies hadn't, testified, fully implemented 5 of the 8 key workforce activities that GAO identified, and they gave you reasons why. What were the reasons why these agencies aren't doing these things?
Well, really, it was a mix of reasons that included things like not having a lot of leadership in this area, given leadership turnover at agencies. Agencies also cited issues around having other competing priorities, trying to work on other workforce assessments that was then delaying their ability to develop their workforce planning strategies. And some agencies, I think, were just, perhaps hamstrung by the sheer magnitude and challenge of this effort, and are really looking for guidance from OPM or others to help them, figure out a path forward.
The second key area that you testified about is improving federal pay and hiring. There have been a number of discussions about how to do that. What are the recommendations that you've given broadly over the years to do that, Candice?
So in a couple of areas, we've looked at pay and hiring authorities. And one of the things that we've found is that agencies are not necessarily utilizing the full spectrum of authorities that are made available to them. And that can be for a number of different reasons. One, they might think it's too bureaucratic or burdensome, administratively burdensome to utilize those authorities to seek the necessary approvals. But then also, too, I think it's just a function of not really fully taking a look at, how they're hiring people and then seeing what authorities are working, which ones aren't. We've certainly heard in a number of instances that, there are a wide variety of hiring authorities. For example, one of our reports, we examined 105 different hiring authorities that were used by agencies, and we found that for the most part, agencies were really only using about 20 of the hiring authorities, perhaps just going back to the things that they've known work well, that don't have those administrative burdens and are easier for them to utilize. And so we think that really, is an opportunity to sort of take a step back and look at whether the authorities that exist are still needed, are they effective, what's working, what's not, what might be outdated, and where reforms may be needed.
The third item is factors that affect the federal work environment, and at first I thought these might be things that are not terribly deep or serious, but upon reading your testimony, this is pretty serious stuff, some of these factors.
Indeed, because it really can have a really significant effect on whether people consider to work for the federal government, and for those who are already working for the federal government, whether they'll want to continue federal employment. And so when we look at issues like sexual harassment, we certainly have found that for a number of people, facing sexual harassment on the job might be one of the key factors that causes them to leave their employment with the federal government. We also saw issues around conference attendance, which for scientists and researchers is really important, because that's really an opportunity that they use to be able to present their research, but also network with other people in their fields and to be able to form collaborations. And we saw certainly a number of instances in our prior work where employees cited the inability to attend conferences to further their professional development as a reason for leaving.
Candice Wright, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Francis.